Orbach. Thank you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Stavros and I, my God. This is first time with Stavros. This is great.
Yeah.
So this is also not your first time in Jamestown. I mean, you've been here a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I came here with my former wife, who was running the Reg, and I had never lived in a small town. I had only lived either in the suburbs in New Jersey, where I grew up, or in a big city, New York, and then later Chicago, and then LA, and then I did a lot of touring in my acting career. So, we would pass through small towns. The first day I was here, we met with Allie Barry. She was one of the first people I met here, and we looked around, the two of us, and we were like, "This is amazing." She said, "Well, it's like Bedford Falls," and I understood that reference, from It's a Wonderful Life, for those of you that don't know. And it's like the iconic small town, And during the years that I lived here, I continued to work. I'd go off and do a regional theater job in San Diego or wherever, and then I'd come back, and I just would love the shift, the anonymity, the neighbors, and sort of my glamorous life juxtaposed with this very kind of normal, almost like a Norman Rockwell kind of sensibility, and I fell in love with it. I looked forward to coming back and seeing some of the friends I made here. And so that's why now, because I happen to be on the way to another gig in the Midwest, I wanted to, see some old friends. And I'm calling it the sentimental journey. Because I drove from Los Angeles, and I stopped all along the way in various cities and saw numerous old friends, and it's been wonderful. Really happy to be here.
Because your next stop is Milwaukee, right?
Yes.
So when you think about California, Jamestown, Milwaukee, it's not a direct line.
No. First of all, I've never been to Milwaukee. In all the years I've toured, and it's a lot of years, I've been in almost every major city in the country, but I missed Milwaukee somehow. So I'm looking forward to it, and I've heard great things about it. So, not looking forward to it in February. Being a Los Angelino, I've gotten used to my shorts and sandals year-round, and pulled out my parka for the first time in about 6 years before I got on the road. But I'm even enjoying the weather. It's I guess invigorating. It's one way of looking at it. But it's change. Change is good.
We get 4 seasons in one day, so it's a good place here.
That's right. That's right. It's healthy. It's good for the mind and the body and the spirit.
So you're born 1953 in Newark.
52.
52, okay.
Thanks for making me younger.
Yeah. Well, welcome to my club. So tell me a little bit about growing up. Tell me about your mom and dad.
Well, I am lucky in that I come from a theatrical family. My mother was a Juilliard graduate, pianist. When she was very young, she did the, concert competition circuit. And then she sort of segued into music of the period. She played swing and boogie woogie and all that. She once accompanied Eddie Fisher. Nobody, that's not our age will know who that is, but he was once married to Elizabeth Taylor and had a pretty good singing career. And then she married my father, and like women of her generation, kind of settled down and became a homemaker, and segued into doing a lot of community theater, Y shows, swim club, cabana shows, and became kind of known in her community for writing parodies. You know, if there was any event, an anniversary, a bar mitzvah, a birthday, whatever, oh, Evelyn, would you, write something? And, it was the kind of thing like, who is the guy that everyone loves? Bernie, that kind of thing. So I grew up with that, and my dad was a singer as well, and did a lot of amateur theater. And then my sister was sort of a child prodigy. She was like Shirley Temple or Miley Cyrus, for those of you that are, younger. And was just a brilliant little singer and performer. And I was kind of, a bit out in the cold. I mean, I could sing and stuff, but I couldn't sing like her. I was sort of the black sheep of the family musically. And I always liken my childhood to the musical Gypsy, if you know that.
Sure.
That like I was like Louise, the ass end of the horse. And if I wanted to perform, Judy would sing for the family or the gathering or whatever it was, and then I would want to sing. So, okay, Ronnie, do a duet with Judy, And the odd thing is that as we grew up, and Judy did perform and had bands and did, a good deal of it, but she never loved performing. Mm-hmm. She always looked at it as an obligation because she was always being pushed into it, where I always had my nose pressed up against the glass, and I was like, let me at it, And so it really wasn't until college that I started to, when I was in an actual play, because all through my childhood, it was like the Von Trapp family, from the time I was 6 or 7 or 8, I was in shows that my mother usually musical directed with my sister. And I didn't know really what acting or other than like, skits and like vaudeville. That was sort of my exposure to performing. Mm-hmm. But then in high school, I did my first play when I was a senior. And then in college, I started doing plays. And around my sophomore year, I had a tremendous experience playing a 60-year-old in Look Homeward Angel. And that was when I finally said, yeah.
So where's college?
Rider College,
sure.
Now Rider University, outside of Trenton, down the road from Princeton. It was great. It was it was really a business college, but it was close to home, and that felt appropriate at the time. And they had a very small fine arts department. It was music, theater, and art all in one department, only about 100 kids. Mm-hmm. And so we were very close-knit. And still to this day, many of us stay in touch. And I had a wonderful professor by the name of Bert Katz, who had been an actor, but was also a playwright, a published playwright, and a wonderful director. And he just believed in me and started casting me in, all kinds of character roles. I didn't know it at the time, but it would be, 6 to 8, 10 years through my 20s before I really was going to have a career, because I was never a leading man. I wasn't pretty. And so once I got out of college, and I did a few programs, I I studied at Circle in the Square with the great Madeline Sherwood, who was the original sister woman in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, and Teresa Hayden, Geraldine, not Page, I can't remember her name now, but great teachers. Arthur Storch, who directed the original Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Really amazing people. I did that 2 consecutive summers, and then I got accepted to the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco when I studied there for a year, sort of the West Coast Juilliard. And that was an amazing year where I'm studying voice and diction and scansion, which is breaking down Shakespeare's verse, and mime and fencing and all that stuff.
Wow.
And it was a tremendous education. And so then I had my first little job at PCPA.
By the way, during this time period, how are you making ends meet?
Oy, as we say in French. I drove a cab in New York City for a little while. My father also had a business in New York, a jeweler's messenger service. So I got my working papers at 14. And, Newark to New York is a 20-minute ride. So I used to go into work with him. And I started to be a foot messenger. And that's how I learned the city. I continued working for him every vacation, every summer, all through my 20s, while I was, even after I moved to New York and was auditioning and, trying to get arrested. And I mean, it was really the whole kind of cliche of the actors, the starving actors world, the driving the cab and then collecting unemployment and then, little jobs here and there. I broke into, this is the funny thing. I teach now, so I tell young actors, never make large pronouncements like I did, fresh out of ACT. I'm never doing musicals, and I'm never doing commercials, because that was, for, not serious actors, and I wanted to be a serious actor. So of course I broke into the business doing commercials and musicals, So, never say never, and don't have notions about things because you don't know. You don't know how it's going to be. So commercials started to give me a bit of a living in the, I guess, mid to late 70s. And that was also when I was driving a cab. My sister was still singing, and she got a great job at the Improvisation in New York City as a hostess, and she was the house singer. Bud Friedman, who recently died, who was the proprietor of the club, hired her. And so I started pulling my cab over. I worked the night shift, so I pulled my cab over at the Improv because I wanted to be in the club and hear the comics,
And that was one of the first. Improv was really the first. Right?
It was the first. It was the only for many years. And of course, famously Lenny Bruce and people like Judy Garland used to come in there. And during my time, Saturday Night Live had just begun, so all those people were coming in. But George Carlin, Pryor, Robert Klein, they were there all the time. And then my generation of Seinfeld and Paul Reiser and Bill Maher and all those guys, they were just getting started. Jay Leno, Carol Leifer, all of them. And I would just watch. And it's kind of how I broke into coaching, because one of the comics asked me to, he had a cold reading for an audition. He asked me to read with him, and I did, and I gave him a few little feedback. And he said, wow, you're really good at this. You should do this. I said, well, talk to some of your friends. And he did, and around 1980, I started a class with about 10 or 15 of the comics from the Improv, including Bill Maher. He was my worst student because he would do nothing but crack wise, hilariously. But I had Paul Reiser, Larry Miller, Carol Leifer, Carol Siskin, Rich Scheidner, Mark Schiff, Steve Middleman. These are a lot of comics that you may not know. Or,
No, I do.
But you know, they were serious, and you know, we would do improvisations and some monologues and scenes and stuff, and it really gave me my start as a coach. But
Did you ever have an inkling to go on the other side of the mic?
yeah, I was just segueing
You go, I'm
into
sorry.
that.
Yeah.
I always did. I had you know, it was so seductive, because, you know, when I broke into the business, I did a lot of comedies and musical comedies, and so you know, I knew my way around a joke, but I think to be a stand-up, you have to have a kind of a love of danger. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You have to want to jump off a cliff with no parachute, because that's what it's like,
Yeah.
standing in front of an audience. And I'll tell you two stories that are emblematic of all those years and how I learned about performing and working with an audience. There was a comic by the name of Mark Weiner, and Mark had, his thing was Mark Weiner and the Weinerettes. And the Weinerettes were these little hand puppets. So the lights would come down and pin spot on a little box, and he would costume his hand so it looked like some kind of like Mac Daddy or, you know, some break-dancing thing of the period, and the disco music would come on,
Yeah.
and he would kill with it, you know. But he was trying to not be dependent on it. So, and every set was 20 minutes. So the last 10 minutes he would do the Weinerettes. But the first 10 minutes he would freeform and try to, you know, find another approach to doing comedy. So it's a Saturday night, like 1 o'clock in the morning, prime spot, full house, and he's dying. By the way, I love the way you speak about how you did. Either you killed or you died. Isn't that interesting?
It is.
I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
it's
yeah,
fascinating. But anyway, he was dying, could not buy a laugh. And, you know, you hear nothing but the clinking of glasses and whispering and mumbling. And it's the most kind of tense, cringe-making environment. And he looks around, he's sweating bullets.
Yeah.
He looks around, and in the most vulnerable, sad way, he looks out at the audience and he says, I don't know. I used to be funny. Pandemonium. I mean, the biggest laugh of the night. The people just roared. And then you see the look on his face. He starts to, like, he's reborn.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like he's reanimated. You know what I mean? And from there on, he sailed.
Yeah.
He killed, went from dying to killing, you know. And of course, he finished off with the Weinerettes, and, you know. But it was a wonderful lesson in being willing to fail, and being willing to be ruthlessly honest, because that's all he did. He just told the truth,
Yeah.
and the audience embraced him, you know. The other one was the famous Andy Kaufman. And of course, Andy was and will always be famous for almost assaulting the audience, almost like begging for the audience to hate him.
Yeah.
And when he was there, he was then in his element, and he somehow knew how to turn that into something amazing and compelling. So one night he comes in, 2 in the morning. It's late. There's like not very many people in the audience, except his fellow comics, who of course crowded into the room because they wanted to see what he was going to do. He gets up and he starts doing 100 bottles of beer on the wall. Now, first of all, everyone's like, you know, what WTF is he doing?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was silly, but he was nothing if not relentless. So he gets through the 90s. He's going into the 80s. Now people are moving from being curious and befuddled to pissed off.
Yeah.
And it's working. We're hating him. The 70s, the 60s, he doesn't stop. He keeps going. And at the point when I thought people would like rush the stage and murder him, he started doing different accents. He started doing it as Elvis. He started doing a French accent, a Spanish accent. He started dancing. It became genius. And he went all the way down to 1 bottle of beer on the wall.
Oh, my
and
God.
by the time he was finished, they could have carried him out on their shoulders.
Yeah.
He was standing ovation.
Oh, wow.
Okay? So it was, again, the same lesson, which was be willing to fail. Be willing to be boring. Right? Be willing to be in a complete land of the unknown, where you're lost and you know, have no idea where you are or where you're going. And out of that comes discovery, you know? When you're willing not to know, you can really discover something true and real and amazing, you know? So those are my big improv stories.
Well, just now back to the story of you, whether you ever had an interest of being behind the mic.
Right.
And being that, is that the kind of where you looked in the mirror and say, I'm not sure I'm willing to go out into no man's land and just jump off the cliff?
Right. What I knew was that though I was comedy oriented and good with comedy, I was not, it was not my only passion. I didn't only want to be funny. I wanted to also move people. I wanted to be a sort of a 3-dimensional actor and play all kinds of roles, and that was more important to me. I mean, one of my, you know, in the 90s I did a sitcom with Richard Jeni called Platypus Man. Richard Jeni at that time was the most successful comic on the road. Worked, 300 dates a year. And Richard used to say all he cared about was 2 things, getting a laugh and getting laid. That was it.
Yeah.
And it was clear because, he was after porno stars and anyone who was famous. He was just relentless about scoring, whether it was with women or with an audience, That was never me.
Yeah.
In either
Yeah.
arena. I love getting a laugh. And it's incredibly, infusing of energy, My first real professional job after college, this was even before, when I was in college, before I went to ACT, was at the Bucks County Playhouse in New Hope, which is a stone's throw from Ryder. And Bert Katz, my professor's younger brother, was an actor. And he was playing a role in Tea and Sympathy at Bucks County Playhouse. Came down with mononucleosis, and he called me and said, I told him that you're perfect to replace me. And what they had done was, they have all the bullies in that in that play, they sort of, wrapped him up into one character. It was one bully. And I went out there, and the first line I got a laugh, and it was like I was born, you know.
Yeah.
And and I was working with a really professional team of actors, so that was I think when I was maybe a junior in college, again, was the moment that I said, okay, I think I want to do this. So,
That's what you needed their approval, but did mom and dad, did they approve? You're launching your career down a path.
I would say to a degree.
Yeah.
My father, being a German Jewish immigrant who had been through World War II, we lost many of our family in the Holocaust. He was kind of security obsessed and wanted me to, not starve and be able to make a living. And so all through the years when I was working for him part-time, living in the city, auditioning, et cetera, taking classes, I used to pay for my acting classes before I paid my rent, And he, at one point, it was him and my uncle were in business together. And at one point, when I was pushing 30 and still hadn't really, hadn't broken through, they offered me to take over the business, which I could have done because at that point I knew the business really well, and I didn't mind it, but I also knew that I wasn't a businessman and would never make a good businessman. And so I, regrettably turned their offer down. And within a year or so after that, I finally got my first equity job.
Yeah.
And that was the musical review, Harry Chapin, Lies and Legends. Mm-hmm. It was a review of Harry Chapin's music, obviously. And it took me to Chicago. I had never been west of Pennsylvania. And man, was that a wonderful awakening in so many ways, to be a working actor, being put up in, down in, off of, on Elm Street, off of, the main, what are they called, the Rush Street, near the lake, and I loved Chicago. I fell in love with it and loved doing the show and working with Harry's brothers, Tom and Steve Chapin, and some wonderful people like George Ball and Amanda McBroom. So that ran for like 9-10 months.
Wow.
In Chicago. And I ended up meeting a girl, falling in love, staying there for like another 10 months after the show closed. That wasn't such a great time, but eventually we came back east, and the show went to the Village Gate, which is no more, but back then it was a big deal. And also it was where Harry had actually gotten his start. Harry had been thrown out of the band by his brothers because he wasn't a very good guitar player, and he was an okay singer, not as good as either one of his brothers. So they threw him out of the band, and so he decided to do his own thing, and he met a cellist. And that was the sound that he found that really defined him. And he first performed, I believe, in the same space that we did the show years after he was gone at the Village Gate. So that was really cool. And then eventually the show came to California, and that's what got me to Los Angeles. Was we played Pasadena Playhouse with the show, and that got me an agent, and that got me to settle in Los Angeles. I think my first job was LA Law, And then I did,
A minor TV program.
yeah, it was kind of big at the time. And then I did a Golden Girls, I did Murphy Brown, I did a lot of the shows of the period. And then got a call from my New York agent about a show called Other People's Money, which was a big hit off Broadway at that time. But I'd done off Broadway already. And, my agent said, well, if you go, you're going to miss pilot season. And I didn't want to do that because I was just with these new agents. And I read the script. I thought, Wall Street had just come out, which is a similar story about, hedge fund people like the Michael Douglas character in Wall Street. And this character of Garfinkel in Other People's Money is a rotund version of the Michael Douglas role in Wall Street. And I thought, this has been done. Why do I need to go do this? So I passed. They didn't give up. My agent said they want you to put yourself on tape. I put myself on tape, and they wanted to hire me. They wanted to fly me to New York, give me an honorarium, put me up in a hotel, and I still said no. I mean, this is the insanity of youth. I was crazy to turn that down. So years later, I finally did the show. After it had been a hit, the actor, an Irish actor who played the role, Kevin Conway, was doing like a Jackie Mason takeoff, but successfully in the role, and won an Obie and then took it to L.A. And it ran forever off Broadway at the Minetta Lane. So some years later, I just got offered it at the Fulton Opera House in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is one of the oldest theaters in America. And so I went and I did it. And opening night, there was a factory in that town that had closed down. And so we inserted the name of that factory in my monologue. And when I mentioned it, the whole audience has one sort of went, oh, and I ad-libbed, friends of yours? Huge laugh, rave review, and the playwright of that play, Jerry Sterner, was in the audience. And he came backstage, hugged and kissed me, and said, why weren't you my Garfinkel in New York? So that's one of those, Tonight Show couch stories of things that you passed on.
Coulda, shoulda, woulda, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But L.A., I, was doing, after I did the Chapin show, I did a few other plays in L.A. and was doing sitcoms and auditioning and stuff. And then in 1993, I got an audition for Laughter on the 23rd Floor, the Neil Simon play. And originally, they wanted to hire younger actors, which would have been appropriate because all the writers, Laughter on the 23rd Floor is about Sid Caesar's Your Show shows. It's Neil Simon's homage, Valentine, to his time working as a 21-year-old writer. It was his first big job in show business, alongside the likes of Larry Gelbart and Mel Brooks, later Woody Allen, but some of the greatest comic minds of the 20th century. And so I flew to New York, and originally I was going to cover some other roles. I was going to be hired to understudy Nathan Lane, who was playing the Sid Caesar role, and an actor, former stand-up, still a stand-up, Paul Provenza, who was
Sure. Yeah,
originally, he's a good friend now,
Yeah.
who was originally hired to play the role based on Mel Brooks. And a week into my employ, and in my audition, I had to audition for Manny Eisenberg, the great producer, and Neil came in, you know. So after I first done it for Jerry Zaks, the director, those guys came in and I had to do it again, and I wasn't nearly as good, but I got the job. So now, we're hired the fourth week of rehearsal. The rest of the company's, ready to go out of town for the out-of-town tryout, which was going to be at Duke University in Durham. And 3 days in, Paul is struggling. I think, as a stand-up, he later became a very good actor. But at that time, I think he thought, I remember him saying something like, Neil never lets you change anything. Well, if you know anything about comedy and Neil Simon, what you know is you don't change a comma.
Yeah.
You don't change a syllable of what Neil Simon writes because the rhythm is exact. It's like science, And he also wasn't able to bring, when you're going toe-to-toe with the likes of Nathan Lane, you got to bring it or he will wipe the floor with you, And that's what was happening, I mean, you had in that company Louis J. Stadlin, Randy Graff, J.K. Simmons, who later won an Oscar for Whiplash, John Slattery, who was famously on Mad Men, a Marklin Baker, who starred in, what's that show with Balky, Perfect Strangers. It was an all-star company. And the structure of the play was that everybody came in one at a time, and then Nathan, as Sid, came in and had like a half-hour aria in which he just, killed it, And then he goes out, and then Ira, Mel Brooks, who was famously always late, comes in the last 15 minutes of the first act. And the requirement is you've got to top Nathan Lane. You've got to come in and be even more insane and bring even more force and energy than he does, which is no easy trick. And Paul just wasn't doing that. He was sort of undercutting and trying to go, and it wasn't working. So he was fired. And so I get a call from the company manager that night. Jerry wants you to come in tomorrow morning at 9:30 before rehearsal at 10 when everyone else was coming. I said, okay. And I had asked Jerry earlier in the week, which role should I focus on, Ira or Max? He said, Ira. I said, okay. And so I was ready.
You've been an understudy, right? You're at this point.
I'd never been an understudy before that.
Oh, I see, okay.
Yeah, it was the first time in my life.
Got it.
And Ira has an opening monologue. He blows in through the door and then lists all of his hypochondriacal mishigas, He's out of his mind. Call my mother. No, don't call my mother. Call my pharmacist. And, he's completely out of his mind. It was one of the greatest entrances anyone could ever ask for. So I had that memorized. I went, and after I did it for Jerry was like, this is great. This is music. This is great. And then that was when Manny and Neil Simon came in and I had to do it for them again. And it was, I was a little tighter. And afterwards, I said to Jerry, I pushed a little, didn't I? He said, don't worry about it. You should think of this as nothing but a triumph. He went out, he fired Paul. He came back and he said, you're on in Durham. he said that didn't mean that I was going to be taken with them to Broadway. It just meant I was on for the out-of-town tryout. And during that time, he was still looking at other options. Could have had anyone he wanted, you know.
Sure.
But fortunately, the 3 weeks at Duke went very well. And God bless Jerry Zaks for teaching me about things in comedy that I didn't really know until him. Things like, you know, don't spin, meaning if you have a line, don't get all involved in the first half of the line so that you run out of air for the last 3 words of the line, which is where the gold is.
Yeah.
That's where the payoff is. So you have to get to the end of the line and pass the ball. In other words, everything in comedy is set up, you know. And so you have to give the actor who's maybe has the punchline, you have to send him a crisp, like a basketball analogy, a crisp chest pass so that, you know, he's set up. And then all he has to do is dunk the ball or a layup, which is the punchline.
Sure.
The punchline is easy, you know. So those were great lessons. And he would sit with me every day before rehearsal and run lines with me and give me direction. And it was the greatest acting comedy lesson I ever had. So the last night in Duke, he came to me and he said, "We want you to do this in New York." And I was, you know, and Neil came up on the stage at one point and said, "You saved us." Can you imagine? Neil Simon?
Yeah.
I was like, you know, that was what I call one of my, you know, I can die now moments.
Yeah.
You know? So that was an amazing experience, my first Broadway show. The night of the opening, Sid was there, Carl Reiner,
Wow.
many of the other writers of your shows were there. It was one of the most glorious nights of my life. I'll never forget it. And then I went on Jerry's recommendation, because I went on a stage, because I was Nathan's understudy, I went on for him about 10 times on Broadway. And when I went on, the person that came in to replace me went on in the role of Ira. So I got familiar. Very funny story. My first time on as Max, he has a big cigar that he smokes, and I had a transition, and I was up. That's the euphemism for not knowing your line. And I was up. I was a deer in headlights. And so I turn up stage, my back to the audience, and I walk around Max's chair, and John Slattery, as I pass him by, says, "Cigar." Because the next line was, "What is this I'm smoking?" And J.K. Simmons famously says, "I'll take a wild guess, Max. A cigar?" "Wrong! It's not a cigar." And then he goes off into something. But, you know, again, this is like big time professional Broadway theater, and, you know, thank God he saved my butt, you know. But anyway, then Jerry recommended me to play Max in the Chicago premiere, with a complete Chicago cast, and, you know. So I closed the show, 2 weeks, I closed, you know, my stint in the show. It closed 2 weeks later. I was sad not to be able to close with the rest of the company, but I was off to Chicago, and now I'm rehearsing it with a bunch of Chicago actors. After, you know, I'm doing, you know, big time New York, you know, accents in in the show on Broadway, and now everyone's talking like this, and, you know, and I couldn't hold back. I felt like I had to say things. You know, I told the director, I feel like I'm, you know, carrying the torch for this show, having just done it on Broadway, and I feel like an obligation, you know, just to share the information that I had. And so I would, you know, for example, in the opening scene, Max comes in and he says, mug. He's hungover. What, Max? Mug. And somebody says, he wants his mug, he wants his coffee. So they rush over and they give him a big mug of coffee. Well, in the rehearsal in Chicago, they came over and they gave me like a demi-tasse, little cup. And I looked and I said, nah, big guy, big mug. And what the actress playing Carol whispered to somebody, big deal, you know, and they were not pleased with me. One of the guys, a guy named Mike Houlihan, who was playing Brian, after I, you know, said, you know, in this moment, this and such, and the emphasis has to be on this word so that this pays off, you know. He says, I got to tell you, I got a real problem here with actors giving me notes, you know. But by the time we opened, they all were in love with me because every single thing that I told them, if, you know, worked.
Yeah, yeah.
And they would start coming to me, Ronnie, how do I get a laugh on this line? You know, so that was a wonderful transition. And that was like the best year of my career, 94, 95, because while I was doing Laughter in Chicago, I got Platypus Man. So I go from a Broadway show to starring in the first regional production of it to getting a major sitcom, the first sitcom on the UPN network.
Yeah.
We followed Star Trek Voyager. That was we were the lead-in for Star Trek Voyager, which was a huge deal.
Sure it was.
So I did 13 episodes of that. And then I came back, and then after doing it in Chicago, I went on the road with Laughter, and got to play places like, you know, Fort Lauderdale and Palm Beach, which were even better audiences for that play than you could have in New York. All those Jews,
Yeah.
you know, were flocking to see our show and standing up at the end every night. So that was just wonderful. And then I came back to LA. I directed a wonderful play that I won an award for in Los Angeles. And then just at the moment when I was running out of money and didn't know how I was going to pay my rent, I auditioned for and got the first national tour of Chicago the Musical. That was the other huge thing in my theater career. No one, you know, Joel Grey had, I think, won the Tony for doing it in New York in the '96 revival, which was way, way more successful than the original production in '75, maybe, with Cheetah Rivera and Gwen Verdon, and my cousin Jerry Orbach.
Yeah.
Who by that point I had gotten to meet. You know, it's crazy, you know, when you have somebody like that in your family, other family members.
He was your cousin, right?
Yeah, was like a second cousin.
Yeah, okay.
And he was doing 42nd Street before I ever had, you know, I was still, I don't know if I was in college or what, but so a relative, another cousin, took us to the show and took us backstage afterwards. And he's like pushing me onto Jerry. And like, you know, he's an actor too. And I was like, oh God, just kill me now. You know, please. I, you know, was so embarrassed. and shook his hand. And by the way, Jerry Orbach was a brilliant, brilliant actor, not just a musical theater actor, as I thought. In the early days when people would say, "Oh, you related to Jerry?" I would say, "Yeah," and I knew he'd done the Fantastics and Carnival and Promises, Promises. But it was before he did Prince of the City and Dirty Dancing and all the other stuff that showed that he had much greater range as an actor than just being a musical theater guy. But 42nd Street, which is a complete frou-frou, show, very, very two-dimensional. But when he came on as that producer, and he has that moment with the girl, and he says, you're going out, you came in here a nobody, but you're going to go out a star, or something like that. And man, you got chills the way he did that. So I was just blown away by him. But I was, as I said, not happy that I was being foisted upon him. Years later, when I'm doing Laughter on Broadway, there's a knock on my dressing room door, and there's Jerry Orbach.
Oh, my God, really?
Yeah.
How cool.
And that was how I wanted to meet him. That's how I wanted him to know me, as a peer, And that same season, I got my first Law and Order. So I show up on the set, and he's like, "Hey, cuz." Couldn't have been nicer. Anyone who you ever meet, ask them about Jerry Orbach, they'll tell you, salt of the earth, one of the great, great people, So that was really cool.
Yeah, it is really cool.
But anyway, so back to Chicago, I get that. In the original Chicago that my cousin did, Amos, Mr. Cellophane, was played by an actor named Barney Martin, who went on to be Seinfeld's dad in Seinfeld.
Yeah.
And he was a big guy like me. But in the revival, it was played by little Joel Grey. And so everybody thought it was meant for a little guy to be invisible, But Walter Bobby, the director, loved the idea of going back to the original idea of Barney Martin. And so that's kind of how I got hired. And as I said, just as I was about to run out of money and not have a way to pay my rent, I got this huge national tour, and it saved my life,
Were you teaching at the same time, and were you doing things other than acting?
Teaching was always my first love, because I taught before I ever had a career as an actor. And so all through that period of time, I would continue to privately coach, occasionally, like in certain cities that we would go to, I would do a workshop, a master class at the local college or high school. So I never really stopped teaching. And I still think of it as my first love. I mean, even though, I love acting, I don't want to stop acting. But teaching, for me, there's something wonderfully not narcissistic. As an actor, if I may, you're always up your own ass,
Right.
if you will, It's like, how's my hair, and what did that sound like, and should I have my hands in my pockets, or, oh God, how could you do that? The self-talk. But when I teach, I'm all about you. I'm all about, how do I help you? How can I make you better? What do you need? And so there's a freedom in it and a joy in it, when you make a suggestion and you see the light come on in their eyes. There's just nothing better than that, So I still teach, and I will always teach.
Hey, I'm just curious, we'll continue on your bio here, because I feel like I'm in a master class with you. It's unbelievable. But things that I don't have the abilities on is, one, when somebody reads a script, you hear about all the time, actors, actresses, they sent me the script. I read the script, and I then could see how it could be played. What does that really mean?
It's a good question. if you read enough scripts, and I've read thousands of scripts in my life, you start to know. You just instinctively know when the writing is good and when it isn't. And, you know, the great expression that we have is, if it ain't on the page, it ain't on the stage. And you can't shine shit. Can I say those
Sure.
bad words?
We got to cover that. I can edit
We
it.
can always snip, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, I don't know, you know, it's like Louis Armstrong said about jazz, if you can't feel it, I can't teach it to you.
Yeah.
You know, if you have the experience and you've studied writing, you feel when you read something, ooh, this is good, ooh, I want to do this. And by the same token, if you read a soap opera script or something that's hackneyed and obvious, you go, oh God, I don't know how the hell I'm going to make this work. What am I going to do with this? This is so boring and obvious and derivative, you know. I knew when I read Laughter on the 23rd Floor that it was going to be brilliant.
Yeah.
I knew when I read the script of Chicago that it was going to be brilliant. But on the other hand, you know, really brilliant, smart people can fail. Merrily We Roll Along is a big hit now, but when it first opened, it bombed. And that's, you know, Stephen Sondheim and a lot of other really, really smart people. I still don't know why it bombed, because I think it's a great show with a great score. And it's sort of getting its due now, finally. But it's, you know, it begins with the script. But, you know, you can screw up a good script if, you know, it's not well cast. If it's not the right casting, or if a director doesn't have the right approach to it, you can screw up a good thing. But usually, when something fails, it's the writing. Almost anything on TV, film, it all begins and ends with the script.
Speaking of failing,
Yeah.
when you audition, the sense of failure is real. And how do you teach actors that it's okay to try and fail over and over again?
Boy, you really like to ask difficult questions, but that's a really good one. And, you know, the great golfer Sam Snead said his big tip to golfers was hit with your practice swing. Right? So what it means is do what you did in rehearsal. Sometimes what happens is you rehearse it in front of the mirror, it's great, and then you walk into the room and you don't know what you're going to face when you walk in the room. Sometimes it's a hot room. People are laughing and kibitzing and they're in a great mood. It's much easier. But if it's a cold room, nobody's talking, they're looking down at your picture and resume, they're not looking at you, you know, what do you do? And, you know, the only answer is do your work. Trust that, you know, the work that you did at home, if you commit to it and you do it the same way, is going to succeed in front of an audience. The audience is always the final ingredient, so you do have to include that. You know, you have to include if you have a moment and it's a joke, and you don't get the laugh, that messes up the timing, and it can, you know, become a problem. But you have to keep going. You have to let that go and move on to the next moment. So there's really not an easy answer to this question. Because the fact is, I've had, as recently as a couple of months ago, I flew into New York. I was called back for the upcoming Eddie Redmayne cabaret that's coming to Broadway. He's playing the role that Joel Grey originated of the MC. And there's a role of Herr Schultz that I'm, made for. Not only am I right for it, but it's like in my blood memory. My grandfather, German Jew, was Herr Schultz, a Jew who thought that because he was a World War I veteran, that he was safe and he would never have issues. He would always, be okay. And he died in Auschwitz, I went in and I told that story, and they were all like, slack-jawed and amazed and thanking me. And then I sang and I read, and I was great. As good of an audition as I've ever had in my life. Didn't get it. Sometimes you walk in and you do your thing and you walk out and you go, oh God, I sucked. That was terrible. And then you get the job. Okay? So we don't always have objectivity. And it doesn't always depend on the quality of your work. Mm-hmm. Usually, you walk in the door and the decision's already made. They look at you and they go, yes or no. He's right, he's wrong. And so the work is almost irrelevant because, you know what I mean? That's how casting goes sometimes. I'm not saying you can't win a job with a tremendous audition or blow one with a terrible one, but it isn't always the yardstick of what makes them make a choice. And, I have screwed up in auditions. I had an audition for the Alfred Molina Fiddler on the Roof. And again, material that I've grown up with my whole life. I later played Tevye in a wonderful production in Sacramento that it's like on my Mount Rushmore. But this was before that, and I go in to play Laser Wolf and cover Alfred Molina as Tevye. And I have a song, what you do, you go to the accompanist. Now, if you're really a professional, you bring your own accompanist so that you know what you're going to hear. That's what, the greatest teachers and advisors will tell you. I didn't do that because I didn't think that the singing for Laser Wolf was really the most important thing. It isn't. But anyway, I tap out the rhythm with the pianist, and he starts the number and he's playing it like bum 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 bum, and I look over him and I say, in the mid-song, and I say, no, it's got to be like this. And he sort of catches up with me. We finish the number, it falls out again, I roll my eyes, and we finish. And then I look at him and I say, don't worry about it. It's a really, really hard number. And Jerry Bach, the composer of that music, says, well, I thought he played it fine. Try to. Now I'm in hell. I know I've screwed up. And I said, well, it certainly could have been me. I certainly wasn't implying that he screwed up. I thought I was taking the onus off of him, but I only realized afterwards that it looked like I was throwing him under the bus. So then the director, a Brit, mercifully says, shall we read? So we read, and I start to hear laughs, and I think, okay, I'm wresting victory from the jaws of defeat. And we finish, I go to the pianist, I apologize profusely so everyone in the room can hear it. He gives me back my music. I leave. The next day, my manager calls me and says, the casting director said that you were hideously rude. You crushed the accompanist like a puppy dog, and he will never, ever again bring you in for anything he's casting. And this is a big New York casting director. I was crushed. Again, I wrote him, said, you don't understand. It was the heat of battle. Okay, maybe I was a little brusque, but, I was trying to problem solve in the moment. I didn't mean any, it didn't matter. He never called me in for, 10 years or more for anything. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of thing that can happen in an audition. Yeah. Needless to say, I did not get that job,
When you are reading, when you go to a casting call, you see on TV the 3 or 4 people sitting in front, again, looking at your picture, looking at your resume. Is that how it works? Are there several people as you do your audition, and they just sort of, after a while, thank you very much, and then move on to the next one?
If it's a musical, yeah, usually there's a choreographer, there's a musical director, the director, assistant director, and then there's somebody that's reading with you. So there's usually anywhere from 5 to 10 people in the room. But sometimes, if you're auditioning, like say for a TV show, you could just go in and just be with the casting director, and they put you on tape, and then they send the tapes to the director. And certainly since the pandemic, self-taping is now entrenched in our business. It's not going to go back. Sometimes they'll still have you come in person for a callback, but sometimes even that is like on Zoom. They won't necessarily, because a lot of casting people and directors and producers, they don't want to have to deal with actors. It's too uncomfortable for them. And that onus is sometimes on the actors who can walk in and be incredibly desperate. And that is cringe-making, One of the things I've tried to do in my auditions is I try to take the focus off myself. I always, how's your day going?
Yeah.
It's been a long day, yeah. Or just engage with them, it's not all about me and what did you think of me and, all that. It's not always easy,
Yeah.
But I think it's important for them to see that you're a person, that you can, like there's somebody that they want to hang with, they want to have in the room, because you'd be fun and, easygoing, easy to work with, not like a diva or somebody that they have to manage because they're so insecure, But, that takes time,
Well, I just thinking about it, such an audition, does it become part interview regarding the person in addition to the actual presentation?
Yeah, that is part of it, When I auditioned for Rebecca Frecknell, the director of Cabaret, I came in and she said, I sat down and she said, oh yeah, let's chat a little. And I was like, oh great, and just like talk. And that's when I told them the story about my grandfather. And it relaxed me, and I think it relaxed them, because they get to know you a little bit. Mm-hmm. And actually, this is something I do often. You can steal this style. After you talk, and it goes really well, I'll say, okay, thanks a lot. I'll see you later, before I've even read, because because that went so well. I don't want to screw it up, But yeah, it is part interview. Part of what they're looking at is how does your nervous system operate? You know, can you flow easily in and out of, you know, I'm talking to you, and now I start the monologue, and I'm still me. I'm not suddenly acting. You know what I mean? And that's a hard thing, again, for younger actors to wrap their brains around. Even older actors, you know, the demand of performing or the expectation that they have of performing, they don't always understand that, you know, acting is life. So you want to bring your life, and you want to bring your organic, natural behavior. You know, if you're acting well in a scene, if a stranger walked in the room, they should think that you're just having a conversation, not that you're doing a scene, you know? And if they do think you're just having a conversation, you know you're cooking,
Yeah.
right?
How do you memorize your lines? I mean, I'm awed by the fact, that, think about long monologues on at stage. You know that the television, they got helpers, along the way, but the guys on stage who can go on a long monologue, I think they have to have it. I mean, what's the technique to memorize?
A lot of people have, different approaches. Some people like to work like, I think there's even an app. You would know this, Stav. There's an app where you can, the app will give you all your cues. So you can just speak and it'll feed you the cues. My technique is very brick by brick. I say the first line, I repeat it. By the way, read the play 1,000 times. Read it every day. Read it 3 times a day. Because every time you read it, you're gonna, oh my God, I missed that. There's always something new that you didn't see the first time. I say the first line, and then I say the second line. And then I put the first and the second line together. And then I add the third line. Brick by brick. That's the only way I know how to do it. And it's always worked for me. I've never had a problem, There is a thing of just getting in your head and getting in your own way. When I was doing Chicago, because it was a long run, you're doing eight shows a week and going from city to city, I would wake up and not remember what city I was in, what day of the week it was. Sometimes I'd wake up and it's nighttime. Oh no, it's first thing in the morning. You'd be disoriented. And then you get to the theater. This is a show, by this time I've done hundreds and hundreds of times. So it's in my bones. I don't have to think about it. But your head will play tricks on you. Like you'll go, oh shit, what's that line? 7 lines in. What's that line? Oh my God, I'm not gonna know that line when I get to that line. And you panic. And then you get to that line and you don't even know how it came out of your mouth. But there it is. Because it's just in your bones, And one of the things I learned is to combat that, or to be, thinking about your grocery list or what you're going to have that night to eat after the show. All kinds of things will come into your mind to sabotage you. So the kind of my mantra is, what's my first line when I enter, and what's my first physical piece of business? That's all I need to focus on. Because once I get out there, I know the map. I've done it thousands of times. I know exactly where to go. I don't have to think about it. So all I have to know is, what's the first moment? And then I'll I'll sail free. And don't focus on anything else. Don't think 5 minutes or a half hour into the show, because that will screw you up.
We got sidetracked down this hole of the actor's studio. I was asking you how the actors work, but I think we're at Chicago going through your biography. And I do want to get through that part of it, because you're on a roll, man. This is
Me?
Yeah, this is fantastic.
Well, thank you.
I mean, I'm getting a kick out of this, so you might go forever. Ed, how's our tape? Had a lot of it?
We're good.
Okay.
Well, let's see. This is actually an interesting part of it. So after I finish my nearly 2 years of running in Chicago, which was the best tour ever, because it was a big honkin' Tony-winning Broadway show, it was a first-class tour. So what that means is every city you go to, you sit down for 2.5 months, and you don't have to live in a hotel. You get an apartment, which saves you money.
Sure.
And it's the best. So I did that for like almost 2 years. And I kept coming back to Chicago after that for 20 years, up until 2017, on and off. They'd bring me in 3 months, 6 months, I played Broadway finally for about 3 months, which was also cool. But I finished, I came back to LA, and in the interim between when I left LA in 93 to go to Broadway, and then end of 98 when I finished the tour, show business changed forever, meaning reality TV was born. And I think of it, it's similar to me as disco, being an old school rock and roll blues lover. When disco came in, I thought it was the end of music. And this was sort of like the end of film and television as we know it, because there weren't as many jobs and people couldn't get their quotes, meaning you couldn't get paid what you would have been paid before that. And so I again, that's the roller coaster of the business. Is I'm on top of the world during this huge, fabulous national tour. I come home, and what have you done for me lately?
Yeah.
In 2000, I got a call again, believe it or not, through my agent from Neil Simon, who pegged me to do a show in New York, which was called Hotel Suite. It was a put together of all his suite plays, Plaza Suite, California Suite, London Suite. So we did a put together of those, and it was great. And again, I'm working with Neil in heaven. While I'm doing that in New York, I auditioned for and got The Producers, the role of Franz Liebkin, the Nazi playwright.
Yeah.
I cannot think of a huger, coup
Yeah.
for a Jew from Jersey who has played a version of Mel Brooks
Yeah.
in Laughter on the 23rd Floor. Now I'm working with Mel Brooks, which was incredible.
Yeah.
And Nathan Lane again, my old buddy, and Matthew Broderick. And
Keep talking. Jimmy.
so it was amazing. And we go into rehearsals, and it started to go downhill for me. I twisted an ankle. Both my ankles were in trouble. My knees. There's a dance number in the show called the Guten Tag Hop Klop, which is sort of, the German beer drinking stuff with the, knee slapping and all that stuff. And it was quite vigorous. And in tech, on a turn, I heard a pop, and I knew it was my knee.
Yeah.
And so I went down, and my understudy, this was like a week before the first preview, and I was devastated because my experience in Chicago was such that if there was a city in America where I was known, it was Chicago, because I'd done Laughter. I'd won the Jeff Award for touring for Amos in Chicago.
Oh, really?
I mean, I had a real following there and nothing but great reviews. So I wanted to open the producers in Chicago.
Yeah.
But Susan Stroman, the director, said to me, after I was rehabbing in Chicago, she said, go home, you'll keep your eye on the prize, which is New York. That's, where you should focus. And I said, okay. But I did get on, after the critics came to Chicago, I got on the last week. I got back in the show. And from my anxiety and panic to want to get up to the level that everyone else was on after 3 weeks of doing the show, I pushed too hard and I blew out my voice.
Yeah.
So now I'm out again. The understudy is back on, finishes the show. I get back to New York the following Monday, and my agent calls me crying. Never a good sign. They are wanting to replace you permanently with your understudy. So, again, from euphoria to agony. And that was one of the worst years of my life.
Sure.
And again, the odd bookend of being the understudy that gets bumped up to being the principal that goes down. And Mel Brooks is connected to both things. It's really kind of weird, So that whole year, what I should have done was leave New York, because the run-up to the producers in New York was the most constant publicity. Every bus had it on, and I'm living in Hell's Kitchen in the district. I walk by the theater practically every day and see all the promotion. The New York Times every day would have an article. Kathleen was with me at the time, and she said, "What is the New York Times a producer on this show?" Because every day there'd be an article about the producers. And then, of course, they open and they win more Tonys than ever in the history of Broadway, right? And I'm just dying that whole time. And then that summer, or I don't remember when it was, but not long after that, I got back into, I got an audition for another Broadway show, and it was Dance of the Vampires, which I got and did, but it closed in 2 months. So I went from the biggest hit in Broadway history to one of the biggest flops. But I was back on Broadway, so my career was somewhat rejuvenated. And, and I went on from there. I did several other Broadway flops, Never Gonna Dance, Soul Doctor, since then, a lot of regional theater. I've had some amazing experiences. I've worked at places like the Goodman in Chicago, the Old Globe in San Diego. I did several shows, La Jolla, Portland stage in Maine. Just some wonderful, meaningful things. The show I did in Maine was called Ben Butler, about the Civil War general. I don't know if you know who that was.
I do.
You do?
Know General Butler, I have his autograph.
Yeah, you see, you're an educated man.
I know Stavros.
He's the guy who broke the color barrier in the military, because runaway slaves came to the fort where he was in charge, looking for asylum, and the law of the time was the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act, which meant that if a runaway slave came, you encountered one, you had to return him to his owner because he was considered property. And so this slick lawyer, Ben Butler, decided to deem them contraband because they were building fortifications for the Confederates. And now they were going to build fortifications for the Union. And so when a Confederate officer in the second act of the play comes to try to reclaim them, I tell him, oh, no, sir. You're not Virginia is no longer in the Union. They've seceded. So you are now representing a foreign country, and I have no obligation to you. And it's just brilliant, And the thing about it is that, because it was about something important in history, the talkbacks afterwards were just fantastic, I got to do a play called The God Committee by Mark St. Germain, wonderful writer, which is about those, transplant committees in hospitals that decide who gets a heart or an organ, right? Well, I did the play in the East, in the Berkshires, and then in LA, I got to direct it. And we had not just talkbacks, we had people signing up to become organ donors.
No kidding.
After the play. We had a little table.
Wow.
So how can you not, we always say, doing what we do, it's not rocket science, it's not brain surgery, It isn't, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't have value and importance. And when you do a play like that can really change people's lives, that's the best of the best. Doesn't get better than that.
Do you have an agent now?
Yeah.
So has that always been the case? Have you, throughout your time period, you work with an agent? Can people work with you directly?
They can, as you go on in the business and people know you, sometimes, you'll get a call from a director or from a theater that you've worked at before, or a casting director that knows you. But most often, it goes through an agent. And I have great agents on both coasts, and, great confidence in them, and I've been with them, probably a few decades, so,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Stavros is an actor. He's done JHS stuff.
I know it well.
And so if you had to give him some advice as a high diddly-dee in actor's life for me, what would you give to him?
I tell my students, it's always the same thing. This is the first thing I always say. Do you love it? Do you love it more than anything in the world? Can you think of anything else you'd maybe be happier doing? Because if you can, do that. Because if you don't love it more than anything in the world, you're going to have a real rough ride, because it's too hard. And unless you get really lucky, like, an Eddie Murphy or somebody that, suddenly becomes famous as a teenager, or someone in their 20s, and you get a big sitcom or a big movie, that's the exception. But the rule is it's not going to make you a fortune, and you're probably not going to be famous. The odds are against you. There's only, at any given time, 95% of the union is unemployed. Those are not good odds. And look at any other union, they have much better percentages. So that's why I say, I've done a lot of jobs where I've been paid handsomely that weren't very artistic. The most artistic things I've ever done, I've been paid $1.350.
Yeah.
You get what I mean?
Yep.
So those moments when you're doing a backers audition or just a workshop for 2 weeks of a new musical or a new show, that, you know, isn't going to earn you big money or big fame or anything. But if it is something you love doing, if you love working with your fellow artists or a particular director or a great playwright, and if that's enough for you, then you have a shot, in my opinion. I would say then after that, work your ass off. You know, work as hard as you can for as long as you can. Read every play you can read, and screenplays, and watch as many movies. Watch the actors that you love, see how they do it. Go to the theater, immerse yourself in it. You know, there's no shortcuts. You know, the love of it is what sustains you, and it's the one thing you can rely on, because show business is like such a terrible parent. If you know, the worst parent says, "Oh, I love you." "Oh, what happened?" "No, you're not so good anymore. You know, you're boring. You're yesterday's news. Bye." That's show business.
Yeah.
So the only thing you can count on is the work and your love for it. If you can be alone in a room and do a monologue and move yourself or make yourself laugh, and it's enough, that's the ticket.
My brain is thinking that Frank Sinatra song, as you think about just an actor's career, I've been up and down and over and out, and I know one thing.
That's life.
You know, that's
Yes.
life. And,
Yes.
I suspect that's a kind of a normal actor's career.
It absolutely is, and it doesn't get easier. When I didn't get Cabaret, which was just this year, I was devastated. I wanted that as much as I've ever wanted anything.
Mm-hmm.
And the only difference is I recovered pretty quickly. You get used to, you get used to no. There's a lot of no.
Yeah.
You have to get used to it. And you have to be undaunted. You have to say, okay, when they say no, it doesn't mean you suck. It just means they didn't choose you. They chose someone else.
Right.
It doesn't mean your work wasn't good. It doesn't mean you're a lousy actor, right? So if you know that, then you go on, you move on to the next thing. And the quicker you can move on to the next thing, the better, But it's a roller coaster, and you really have to be ready for that. And again, as I say, I'm a veteran. I've been doing this for 4 decades plus. It still isn't easy when I get the no.
Yeah.
It might even be harder. You know what I mean? Because the road gets narrower as you get older. There are less and less roles, right? So when you finally get one that, you're right for and you really have a shot at, you feel like, I got to get this. How many more shots am I going to have? But the actor who has the capacity to absorb the no and not take it personally, which sounds like a hilariously ridiculous thing to say, because who else are they? You're the commodity, right? But if you can find your way to that, to say, okay, they didn't choose me, that's okay. That's, no skin off my ass. What's next? And I think also, especially nowadays, and this is where somebody like Stav is way ahead of the game, because he's technologically gifted and knows what he's doing, is blaze your own trail. Write your own material. Get together with other actors and artists that you like. Put on a play. Make a short film, right? Create content. There's all kinds of, web shows now, podcasts, etc. There's so many more platforms than when I was starting out. But there's also way more competition, right? So it's one thing I can guarantee, it ain't easy. That I can promise you. But it's not impossible if you love it and you're willing to work your ass off.
I'm just looking at your long litany of a long list of accomplishments, film, television, stage. They're all different. And I always, we've been spending most of our time talking about your stage, and I
Yeah.
suspect that's where you like the live aspect of it.
No doubt. And it's where I'm at my best. Other than Clueless, which is my one sort of big cinematic moment, I haven't done a whole lot of film, more TV. But I would say until recently, I never had very many good experiences in front of the camera. Sometimes when you get a commercial, that can be fulfilling because you're the star, right? It's just you in a commercial, then it's all about you. That's when filmmaking is fun, when it's your story. I had a wonderful film experience over the summer with a director and a group of actors, all from my teacher's class. My teacher, Larry Moss, is my mentor, great coach. He coaches Leo DiCaprio and lots of other people. And so all these actors were from Larry's class. So we were all buddies. We all knew each other and had simpatico. And it was like a love-in. And the director, I was playing like a kind of a Texas shit kicker, which about is as far from me as it gets, a Jew from Jersey. What am I doing playing? Yeah. And when I did the reading of it, I gave it my all and everything, but I never thought he was going to hire me. I thought I was just helping out friends in the reading. And 3 days later, he calls and he offers it to me, and I tried to talk him out of it. Because I'm like, dude, are you sure you know what you're doing here? I mean, I don't know if I'm right. But he said, you crushed it. I want you. I said, okay, great. So all through the shoot, he was so sensational in the way he worked with me. He loved that I gave him something different on every take. But he was really on top of me because my orientation is for a big room, and you have to get yourself down to fit in that little frame, right? Yeah. And so if I have a moment if you ask me a question that I don't like, let's say, so I'm like, Greg, that's really messed up, okay, if it was a stage moment. But if it was a film moment, it might be more like, Greg, not cool. Yeah. All right? Now, all I did was move my eyes. I kept my head still, or I tried to. I don't know. Ed will tell me if I was successful.
I thought you were.
But the point is, on film, all you have to do is think it, and it will register on your face. And so the joke on the set became, Ron, don't tilt your head, don't move your eyebrows, and eventually, don't breathe. Because in my training, what I've learned is that any emotional transition comes on the breath, right? If you're afraid, right? If you're excited, right? If you're angry, it's all in the breath. So anytime there was a transition, I would breathe and my shoulders would rise up, I'd say, don't move your shoulders. I said, but I have to. Don't breathe. I said, don't breathe? What do you mean don't breathe? But eventually, in the course of the shoot, I really got it. I really started to know when it was too big. And I would do a take and I would say, it's too much, right? Yeah. Less, do less. And when I would do a take where I would just be rock still and stay focused on a point and just kind of let the words fall out of my face, he would say, cut, brilliant, you crushed it. And I would say, but I didn't do anything. Exactly. You didn't do anything. You just were living and let the material come through you, right? And you got out of the way of it. So I guess the point of that story is you never stop learning.
Sure.
Never. You know, that's why I love teaching so much, you know, is because I learn from my students. A student will say something or do something or reveal something, and it'll take my breath away, you know, and being willing to say I don't know, you know, that's a big thing. A student will ask me, well, what should I do with it? I'll say, I don't know. What do you think? And then it makes them have to figure it out or have to discover it on their own, which is the best way, you know. I'm not a guru. I'm not somebody that's there to feed them every moment. I'm just going to partner with you and be something of a guide, but I need you to fully participate in the process because you're the performer, right? So that's something that I always try to keep in mind, the willingness to not know and to be. I love this this mantra from Ted Lasso: "Be curious, not judgmental." Mm-hmm. That's to me the greatest thing in the world.
Ted Lasso.
You know.
You're great. This is fabulous.
Thank you.
What's the question I should have asked you, or Stavros should have asked you, that as you're driving in today, and you really know what to expect, you know, here we are, we're going to have an afternoon at the Jackson Center. Is there a question you thought maybe I would ask or we would have asked that we didn't?
Boy, it's been very thorough. You know, I mean, I don't know, and I don't know the answer to this, but, you know, what keeps you going, or what makes you still, after all these years, you know, what keeps the love of the craft alive? And I guess I would just say, you know, the next mountain, you know? I mean, like, I'm going to do this play, The Chosen, which is based on the Chaim Potok novel and was a movie in the 80s with Robbie Benson and Rod Steiger playing the role I'm going to play. And it's about a Hasidic rabbi. Now, I have, at best, a very ambivalent relationship with my Judaism. I'm not, you know, a big religious person. But when I first saw it, you know, it's two fathers and two sons in the play. And it's really about the boys' relationship. But when I first saw it, I thought, there's no women in this. And it was like post-Me Too, you know, and I thought, this is so retro. You know, this is so, I don't know, it's not speaking to me. And, you know, I mean, a play about Jews, and where's the mothers? How can there be no mothers even, you know? So I had an opportunity to replace him, and I passed. Now, several years later, he comes back to me, and we're in a whole different time with all the anti-Semitism in the world right now. And, you know, now I'm feeling like maybe it's the right time for this play. And it's going to be very challenging for me to play a rabbi who is, completely, utterly, hook, line, and sinker committed to his faith in God. That's going to be something difficult for me to work on. I mean, I have some ideas about how I'm going to do it, and I have to do a Yiddish accent. That's going to be challenging. I mean, I feel confident that I can do it, but, every single time you start a new project, it's a little bit like learning how to act all over again, because you have to learn how to play that music that you've never played before. So in order to do that, you have to call upon elements in yourself that maybe you've never had to call upon before. And so it's scary, and it makes you vulnerable. And that's the best thing in the world. For me to be afraid, to think I'll never be able to do this, that's when I'm in the right place. Because that makes me work and read the play again and again and again until something breaks through for me. And then I go, now I know. And I've had that experience hundreds of times in my career, where I come to a moment and I can't learn the line. I keep forgetting the line because it's not clear to me. I haven't figured out how to play that moment, and that's why I'm forgetting it. And I sense it's coming, and I dread it, and the moment comes, and once again, I'm unsuccessful, and I kind of beat myself up, which is a thing I try to teach my students never to do, because it's a waste of time and energy. But I'm guilty of it anyway, but I work and work and work and work. And then one day, I get the eureka, and oh my God, why didn't I see this? Now I know. And then that moment that I dreaded becomes my favorite moment.
Yeah.
I can't wait to play that moment now because of what it cost me to figure it out, right? So I don't know if that answers the original question, but
But it leads to another one,
okay.
unrelated, totally unrelated, talking about lifetimes and the 2024 anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier about your grandfather,
Yeah,
World War I veteran. I've read about those people who were Jewish, World War I, German vets, and expected to be treated as a vet.
Right.
And were anything but. Could you talk about your family? And let me just, while you think about that,
Yeah.
just a backdrop here, we've had interviews with a lot of German immigrants who've come to Jamestown.
yes,
And in the Nuremberg trial, which of course is Robert Jackson, which of
Yes.
course is us.
and what's the name of the lawyer who prosecuted it? The little guy.
Ben Ferencz.
Yeah,
Yeah, I've interviewed him a couple times.
he was here.
Yeah, yeah,
I remember him, I met him.
yeah, yeah.
He's, what a beautiful, brilliant guy.
He was indefatigable. He was just about
Yeah.
this big. And so that's part of our DNA.
Yeah,
Is in fact that time period, and your grandfather and your family were caught up in that in the
Right.
worst of ways. But if you could share that and maybe how that impacts you.
that's a real good, you should stay with this. You're pretty good at it. Okay, my father tells the story. My father's no longer here, but he told the story of around 1928. He would have been about 6 years old. A good friend of my grandfather's came to town, and he was now in a brown shirt with the swastika. And he said to my grandfather, "Arnold, wir kommt," meaning, "we're coming." So you might want to think about getting out. And years later, I remember my father reading the diary of my grandmother, who lived with a Christian family in Berlin through the entire course of the war, like an Anne Frank kind of situation. And he would read that diary, and he would shake his head in emotional consternation and say, "Why didn't Papa get us out?" Because the same man who was a World War I vet, he came to this country in 1912, before the war, and worked as a waiter at Luchow's on 14th Street, spoke the language, and had a network of people here in America. He could have easily emigrated, but his stubborn belief that as a World War I veteran he would be safe prevented him from doing so. Around the time Hitler came to power, my father was with his older brother, and they were on bikes, and they came into a square where there was a confrontation between brown shirts and communists, and they were like caught in the middle of it, and he remembers his brother taking the bicycle pump and brandishing it as if to say, "Don't you better stay away from me and my brother, or I'll crack you one," you know. He remembers that moment. And then in 1940, really late in the game, after his older brother had already gotten out, because in those days you could only get out if you had somebody put up a bond and sponsor you to come over. So they got enough the money for Uncle Henry, and now my father was the middle son, he was next. And unbeknownst to his parents, he left with some buddies. He was 18, and they got in a boat across the Rhine into France, which is at this point Vichy France, occupied and controlled by the Nazis. And he makes his way, mostly on foot, eating berries and sleeping during the day and moving at night, through France, steals a coat in Marseille, makes his way to the Pyrenees, and gets across the Pyrenees and is greeted by a member of the underground who says, "Welcome to free Spain," at which point he breaks down, remembering what that meant. Through Spain to Lisbon, where he gets on a boat. After some shenanigans in the visa office, where he had to spend a week or two trying to get his passport back, but he gets on the boat and he's in a cabin with 6 other guys, one of whom is a priest, and the others are Brits, and they're on a boat to America. And my father has a habit of getting up before everyone and going to sleep before everyone. And the priest finds this odd, and he realizes that the reason my father was doing that is because he was ashamed of his underwear, which was gray and stained and old, and he didn't want anyone to see. And he comes in the next day and he finds 6 pair of underwear and 6 pair of socks on his bed, and with a note saying, "Now maybe we can all get some rest around here." Okay? He comes over, he goes to work with his brother in the garment business, joins the service, goes back. He rises to the rank of staff sergeant in Army intelligence because he speaks German, and he's interrogating Nazi officers.
Was he part of the Ritchie Boys at all?
I don't know.
Okay,
I don't think so.
It's a separate.
And I know what that is, though. I've seen the doc on that. And is wounded twice, once at Anzio, and eventually is reunited with his youngest brother, who was picked up 10 months before the end of the war and went to Auschwitz, survived Auschwitz, was like 60 pounds when they were brought back together. My grandmother was also not in good health. And my father had done kind of well in the black market. He had a Jeep. So he took them to Hitler's playground. I forget.
Berchtesgaden.
Yes, which was now turned into a kind of a resort and rehab for veterans and victims of the concentration camps. And he got them a place there and nursed them back to health, re-upped in the service, went in for like another year so that he could do that, and then eventually brings them over. They go into business. They had a deli over the apartment in Newark. The 48 blizzard wipes them out. My father and mother had to pay that debt off for many years. My uncle never participated in it, but invited him into the jeweler's messenger service business that they ran for 30 years.
What is that, by the way?
A messenger,
Yeah,
jeweler's messenger service? It's the legs of the jewelry industry.
Okay.
If you go to like 47th Street or Canal Street, where the engravers and the diamond setters are and all that, they need somebody to transport the goods from there out to New Jersey or Brooklyn or the Bronx or wherever the stores are where they're going to be sold.
Okay.
Okay? And so they had gathering of that in the morning, and then at lunchtime there was like a big sorting table like at the post office, and packages, little envelopes with watches and diamonds and all stuff are being thrown here and there, and then everyone goes out in their cars to their routes. Their security was their anonymity. They looked like sort of construction workers with boxes that didn't look like they were carrying anything important. There's a famous story where they had a robbery and the criminals couldn't get away because the station wagon was a stick shift and they didn't know how to drive it. It was in Life magazine.
Yeah.
But anyway, at the end of their 30 years of business together, and my uncle, this is getting back to the main question, was an immigrant who never learned the language as well as my father because he married another immigrant, whereas my father married a girl from Jersey whose parents were Russian lefties, and so he learned the language and was a better front person for the business. But all through the time that they worked together, I always keenly observed how my uncle had a foot on the neck of his older brother. And even though they were partners, my Uncle Larry was always in charge.
Right.
They always had a newer car. They always had a slightly better house. They always took slightly longer vacations. And there was tension, especially between the wives, because his wife kept kosher, we did not. Tension, a lot of tension, and judgment because of my family's theatrical pursuits. They would make fun of that, and all I ever heard is, are you going to go to shul on Saturday? And when are you going to marry a Jewish girl? And when are you going to Israel? Maybe that had part of something to do with why I kind of pushed away from that. I later learned that my Uncle Larry was, ethically very challenged. He once made a pass at my mother. He made regular passes at their Irish spinster secretary. And he used to say, he would say, he wasn't just right 100%. He was right 1,000%. Okay? Not an easy man to deal with. When they sold the business, he screwed my father over. They sold it for like, I don't know, $350,000. He gave my father 50 grand after 30 years of partnership. And my father was walking around like Willie Loman, banging his head against the wall. How could I be so stupid?
Yeah.
And the result of that is that it turned my father into Ralph Cramden, always looking for the fast buck, how he could, I'll show them that I wasn't a fool. And he participated in, the sweepstakes that they send you, all that ridiculously fraudulent shit that they, oh, Manfred Orbach, you're going to win $30 million. Just send $25 to, right? The Lakota children in Arizona, he would send cash in an envelope. He would give his credit card numbers. So by the time of his death, most of his fortune was wiped out from fraud. And he drove my mother further into Alzheimer's because he neglected her and picked on her. So the end with my father and I was really not good. And my relationship with my uncle, by the end, was that he was not somebody that I had any feeling of real compassion for, even though I know what he suffered. It gave me a view about Holocaust survivors that's very different from most people think of them as like Elie Wiesel, the sort of poetic, gentle spirit, and many of them are. But my Uncle Larry caused me to think that only the badasses who were the toughest MFers lived through the Holocaust. Anyone that was gentle and poetic probably died because they couldn't handle it. I've since come to the belief that neither is true. What's mostly true is that it was just damn random luck.
Right.
So does that answer?
Well, how does this, yeah, it does, it's a great, amazing
Yeah.
answer, but you're gonna be playing a rabbi, a Jewish
Yeah.
rabbi.
Yeah.
And in the background, you can't dismiss what you've just told me.
That's correct. That's correct.
You gotta translate that somehow and
Look,
assimilate it.
I played Tevye. I had the same issue.
Yeah, yeah.
How do I find his faith in God, right? Well, for me, it's a simple transition. My faith is in love. That's my North Star. I'm not a wealthy man, but I have the greatest friends in the world. And I, think of them as my riches. His mother and father,
Yep.
For example, we are like this. And it's been years. It's been 6-7 years since I've seen them.
Yeah.
He's grown into a man. I remember when he was a crazy little kid, That's where my faith comes. And if I have a temple, it's the theater. That's where I worship. So I can translate those things into my faith in God, I think. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. I will definitely go to an Orthodox temple and watch and listen and learn and see what I can pick up from that. But it's the same idea of you don't have to be a prostitute to play a prostitute or be a murderer to play a murderer. You have to find what we call in my craft an as if, something that is as close to that as you can get that resonates for you.
Stavros, is there a question you're dying to ask Uncle Ron here?
I've had some thoughts about what to say, but then he's went and touched on it and answered the questions I was going to say without me having to ask.
This has been unbelievable. I have really gotten a kick out of this.
Thank you. It's
And
been-
you're a remarkably interesting guy. And
Thank you.
I can
It's,
see why.
you look, I love what I do, and I feel still blessed that at almost 72, I still get to do it.
Yeah.
You know, I haven't been put out to pasture yet, although they've certainly tried. And so I feel, you know, I feel lucky,
Yeah.
you know, and grateful. And I think that's a big key to life, you know. It's so easy, especially our world is so negative. There's so much awfulness now in the world, I think more than ever in my entire life. The polarization in this country, the awfulness and the wars and the you know, antipathy between religions and different ethnicities and stuff. So it's easy to get negative. It's easy to say, you know, life sucks and then you die. It's easy, especially if you happen to work at a job you hate and you're just doing it to make money and that's all you've got. And you're working, you know, as Willie Loman says, you work 50 weeks a year for a 2-week vacation, you know? Or the famous quote of most people live lives of quiet desperation, you know? Because of that, because of the fact that the world is so negative, and to stay positive, it's not like some wooshy nice idea. It's something you have to be fierce about. You have to fiercely choose joy and choose happiness and positiveness and an outlook that has belief and faith in the future, right? You have to work at it because there's so many ways you can stumble and fall and be pushed down. And, you know, it's in just day-to-day interactions with people. Like, if somebody says, "How you doing?" Most people say, "Yeah, I'm okay. No, I'm good." It's, you know, non-committal. It's not really happy. It's not really sad, you know. But if you say, "Great," people
Now
look at you like,
it's like, what?
"Dude, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
What kind of, you know, what kind of an idiot are you?" You know,
Are you kidding me?
because they resent you. Because their life maybe isn't so great. And they don't want to hear about how great your life is. But on the other hand, they also don't want to hear, "Oh, you don't know, my mother, my sister, oh my God." They don't want to hear that either. They just want everything just to be nice and fine. They don't make waves, you know? That's never been a life for me. I've just never been that guy. So,
It's clear, and I'm just so glad we were able to get you today. Stavros, good job put in for mileage. to get him here.
I thank you for asking me. This
Yeah.
has been kind of wonderfully fun and enriching for me, you know? So thank you, Greg.
Thank you, thank you.
And thank you, Stav.
Yeah,
You're welcome.
yeah, he's the agent of change agent right
Yep,
here.
and thank you, Ed.
Thank you.
Oh, gosh, thank you.
Huge fan.
Oh, bless you, bless you.
I love Jerry. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.